Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to today's program and thank you for attending. You showed up because you care about the welfare of Israel, and I imagine are very concerned with the current situation. Israel needs our support, arguably now as much as ever before. We gather today in a very challenging time for Israel. To many of us, it feels like Israel is not only assaulted by terrorist rocket fire, but it also seems that its very legitimacy is under attack daily. We see this on social media, in academic settings, in the press, on TV, by some in our own government, and sadly among our own acquaintances and friends. So it may feel like it takes courage to speak up for Israel at this time. I believe we need to re-energize our faith in the righteousness embedded in the history and conduct of Israel. In that spirit, I again want to thank and express gratitude for you attending today. We're filled with strong feelings and empathy for the plight and miseries of people on both, innocent victims on both sides. But that does not mean that there is not a side that we can support in a war between a democratic nation protecting its people and a gang of terrorists who are targeting civilians. It's easy over here to question this or that Israeli policy or to criticize the behavior of some of its citizens. Israel is far from perfect, and there is place for improvement of everything made by man under the sun. But now is not the time for condemnation or to sit on the sidelines. Now is the time to support Israel. Its record of achievement and moral behavior in the face of pervasive existential threats is nothing short of miraculous. So what do we hope to get from today's program? We want to strengthen our sense of solidarity with Israel. We want to realize, as attendees today, that we are part of a large American and local community of caring for Israel, and we want to learn how we can help. Before introducing our guest, I want to thank our co-sponsors, most importantly, the Jewish Federation of Raleigh-Cary, who have been instrumental in getting this program together. Bethel Synagogue, Beth Meyer Synagogue, Chabad of Cary, the Raleigh chapter of Zionists, Chabad Young Professionals of Raleigh, and the Duke Israel Public Affairs Committee have all sponsored us. And they are from all spectrums of our community. I also wish to thank organizations who have given supportive input, words of encouragement, and have also publicized the event. That is Temple Beth Or, Jewish for Good, Kehillah Synagogue, Chabad Center of Raleigh, and Chabad at Durham Chapel Hill. Now I want to introduce Anat. Anat Sultan-Dadon assumed her role as Consul General of Israel to the Southeast US in July of 2019. She has had former posts all across the globe: Cameroon, Germany, the Netherlands, and most recently in Australia. She's visited our area. It's been a pleasure to meet her. She's doing a fantastic job. And she told me not to go on and on, so I won't. But she is joined in Atlanta by her loving husband, Yaron, and their 3 daughters. So now, Anat, let me also say, I'm sorry, Anat's going to speak for a while. Then Phil Brodsky, who was the executive director of the Raleigh-Cary Federation, is going to interview her, and then we'll open it up to you for questions. And if you have questions, just put it in the chat, and we will read your questions then. I'm sorry. So here, Anat, take it away.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to all who are joining this Sunday afternoon. Following what has been a very difficult week in Israel and what continues to be a very difficult situation on the ground in Israel. We have had over the past week, as I'm sure many of you have been following, as of now, over 3,100 rockets have been fired from the Gaza Strip into Israel by Hamas, the Iranian-backed terror organization, by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, deliberately aiming those rockets at Israeli civilian populations, while doing so from within their own civilian populations, using them as human shields. This constituting a double war crime, one that we have seen sadly in the past as well. Um, Israel, like any sovereign nation, has not just the right, but the duty to act in defense of its country, of its citizens, which is what we have been doing. The Israeli Defense Forces has been acting to target those terrorists and terror infrastructures within the Gaza Strip. It has conducted over 1,500 such targeted attacks. We have sadly seen 10 Israelis lose their lives due to the terror attacks targeting our civilians. We have had hundreds injured, and sadly also, and this is something that we regret, Palestinians have lost their lives, either because they are being put intentionally in harm's way, as I mentioned, being used as human shields, or because anywhere between 15 to 30% of rockets launched from the Gaza Strip are actually misfires, resulting in them landing within the Gaza Strip, causing destruction and damage. We will continue to act to defend ourselves and to ensure that Hamas is not capable of orchestrating again what it is orchestrating now. And that is what we are busy doing. We have been receiving much support from around the world, including from the United States. But there are, sadly, as I'm sure you're all aware, many other voices who are not quick to condemn, if not even support, what a terror organization is doing. And that remains a challenge. I will, I think, stop here, and Phil will be happy to answer and have a conversation.
Thank you, Consul General. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I'm sure it's been a hectic and stressful week for you. So first of all, thank you for being with us. I wish we were meeting for the first time under different circumstances, but also let me just say that I know for sure everybody here on this call and the Jewish community across Raleigh, Cary, Wake County, and the Triangle, we're all sending our thoughts and prayers to you and to our friends and family and the citizens of Israel.
Thank you.
Yeah. So first of all, how are you doing? How are your friends and family doing right now?
Well, I think even in normal times, it is never easy being away from Israel, especially since because of COVID, it has been a really long time that I have been there. It is not easy to watch what friends and family are currently going through. My parents in Jerusalem, my father is over 80, with rockets launched in the beginning of the week at Jerusalem, and how they are going to find shelter. But really all around Israel, millions struggling, trying to protect themselves, protect their children day and night, really, from this incessant barrage of rockets being fired at them. And I will say, being here, it's not only a challenge being away, but obviously what the consulate has been busy with, and I have been busy with, is getting the message across as much as we can to as many as we can, trying to break through also to other communities in order to explain what this really is about.
Yeah. it is hard being here on a beautiful spring day. But my wife, her father lives right outside of Jerusalem, and her family have been sending us videos on WhatsApp. And one of my closest friends has the Seva Dome app on her phone where she's seeing the real-time alerts. So just trying to put ourselves in their shoes and just empathize in any way we can. So you're the Consul General of the Southeast, which is quite a large territory. First, what kind of response are you seeing in your territory in America? How are people responding to it here? How's the Jewish community responding? How are others responding? What are you seeing?
Well, I think in general, our consulate covers 7 states in the Southeast region. So being based in Atlanta, we cover, of course, Georgia, but also in North Carolina, South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi. And overall, I would say that we have many friends here. We have excellent relations on many levels. And we've received many messages of support, not just from the Jewish community, but from governors, from members of Congress, from senators. And that is an indication really of the strength of the relations between Israel and the United States. The Iron Dome, that is doing such an amazing job protecting lives, is among other things an excellent example of that close cooperation between Israel and the United States. But there are also other voices, as we are all seeing. And not only are there other voices who choose to condemn Israel while it's protecting itself from terror attacks, but there are those who are silent, who may well agree with what we are doing, but because there is an atmosphere in which they fear perhaps for being attacked in the public sphere, they prefer to remain silent. And I think that that is very dangerous. It's very dangerous morally in general. And we are encouraging everyone to not only speak out, but to reach out within their networks to their contacts and encourage them to speak out. Because one can have many conversations about Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and a lot of complexities in our region. But this simple truth is very simple. Israel is being attacked by a terror organization who makes no secret of its goal to eliminate the state of Israel and every Jew really around the world. That is what it calls for. And we are acting to protect ourselves in full accordance with international law. And that, I think, is something that should be supported by anyone who shares our values.
Yeah. Speaking of speaking out, I know that I've read that President Biden has spoken with Prime Minister Netanyahu, that Blinken has been over there. So how has at the top level, what's the conversation been like between Israel and the United States? How is America right now helping support Israel's response, and what type of impact is that having?
Well, we have indeed, we enjoy close relations with the United States, with the American administration. President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu have had several calls, and Israeli officials are in constant contact with American officials. We are sharing our intelligence, sharing the facts in the situation on the ground. And that will continue to be done because the United States is our closest ally. There is an understanding, and we have received statements recognizing the legitimacy of Israel defending itself, which is what we're doing.
We are starting to get some questions in the chat box, which I want to let everybody know I am seeing. Some of them are about very particular things that have been reported in the news. So I was wondering, Consul General, if you could just help us back up and give a little context. You know, I know what's happening. It seems like there's many layers of different things happening that ended in this eruption of violence. Can you just help us understand, from your perspective, what are some of the main current events that stand out that help explain how we got to this point right now where, as you said, over 3,000 rockets have been fired from Hamas upon Israel? But that didn't just happen overnight. So what are the, you know, it was Ramadan, there was Jerusalem Day, there was a parade, there was what was happening in East Jerusalem neighborhoods, there's a Supreme Court case happening. Can you help us understand the different layers there and take us through that? What's your perspective? What's your context?
Yes, gladly. You mentioned a few issues that have been in the media. And what is interesting is that none of those are actually what lie behind this current situation and Hamas's decision to attack Israel. What is at the core of this is Hamas recognizing an opportunity in their view to strengthen themselves and to try and establish a new reality within the Palestinian territories and among the Palestinian people in order to strengthen themselves on account of the Palestinian Authority. There were planned, as many of you, I am sure know, there were planned to be elections held for the Palestinian Authority, elections which have been canceled, also because it was projected, they've been canceled by Mahmoud Abbas, but also because it was projected that Hamas would win by a landslide. Hamas feels emboldened, and its internal considerations are what lie behind their reasoning to exploit this timing of heightened sensitivity around religious holidays, and this situation in Jerusalem. They are exploiting it for their own interests. The Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem has been cited as one of the supposed reasons for this escalation. It has to do with a private property dispute that is being debated in the courts, that has to do with several families, Palestinian families, who are currently residing in property that they do not own, and they have stopped paying rent. Yes, of course, because it has to do with Palestinians residing in those properties and Jewish owners of those properties, this all takes a whole new magnitude, which is why Israel, making every effort to de-escalate the tension, has actually postponed the Supreme Court hearing on this matter by 30 days in order to allow for tensions to de-escalate. But because that is not really the issue, nothing that Israel can do or has done really will make a difference for Hamas, because they have planned this. This is an orchestrated, premeditated attack on Israel. Israel went to great lengths with regards to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Temple Mount. We have all along ensured the freedom of worship for all religions, for all worshipers in Jerusalem, in the holy sites. And that is what we are continuing to do even these days. Even as we are still bombarded by rockets, we are still allowing for Muslim worshipers to enter Temple Mount and Al-Aqsa Mosque. We actually took an unprecedented step on Monday, Jerusalem Day, in prohibiting Jewish worshipers from entering the Temple Mount. Again, in another measure taken in order to de-escalate the situation. But again, because everything was just a pretext and everything was just an excuse for what had already been planned for their own internal political reasons, Hamas was intent on carrying out this attack regardless of justifications. And of course, there cannot be any justifications for the intentional, deliberate targeting of civilians as Hamas is doing.
Thank you. We're getting some questions about what's going on inside Israel right now, and it seems like there is somewhat unprecedented, or we haven't seen this in a very long time, clashes in the streets between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs. Can you comment at all on what is happening, on the people-to-people level? What are we seeing? Where is it happening? And also, what is Israel thinking about doing? How to calm those tensions and help bring people back to the center and deflate the extremists?
I think that is one of the saddest phenomenon that we have seen these last few days, because Israeli society has enjoyed decades of peaceful coexistence. That is what Israel is about, whether you're an Israeli Jew or an Israeli Arab, or a member of any of the other minorities in Israel. This is a very tense situation, which possibly has added to the vulnerability of those who have been susceptible to the deliberate incitement by Hamas, by Palestinian extremists who are actually calling on Arab Israelis to attack Jews. And we have seen, sadly, from both sides, we have seen extremists among Arab Israelis. We have seen also extremists among Jewish Israelis. Both are condemned by every politician, by the president, by the prime minister, by our government. The police and security forces are taking every measure in order to ensure that there is order, that there are no attacks, damage, injuries. And we will bring to justice also anyone who has participated in such actions, whether they are Arab, whether they are Jewish, because that is not Israel. We have seen alongside that many very, very encouraging demonstrations of unity and solidarity, because that is what Israel really is about and has been for decades. In my childhood neighborhood in Jerusalem, in the French Hill, where my parents still live, just 2 days ago, I saw beautiful photos of civilians, Arab, Israeli, in the neighborhood demonstrating together for the unity and coexistence that we have always been about. And I think that that is stronger than the current situation. There will be healing to do, but I think that what we are about will prevail. And Israel is about diversity. And that is what we will continue to be about, to live in coexistence alongside one another, whether it's Jews or Arabs, or whether it's any other groups that form our society.
Thank you. That's very beautiful and connects back definitely to the values that Israel is founded upon. I've taken many trips of college students to Israel, college students from not just Jewish students, from many backgrounds, and we've gone all over the country, and and throughout the West Bank, and we've always taught that Israel is a place that anybody can connect to. That's one of the beauties behind it. And one of the things that I'm wondering that I always dealt with on college campuses, I've personally been to over 100 college campuses in the United States, and it's not just when what's happening now happens, but so often when the conversation of Israel comes up, it's framed in such a divisive way. It's a pro-Israel rally over here, an anti-Israel rally over there. But really, there's so many people that just believe in peace and security and freedom for all the people there. So, what advice do you have for me and for the people on this call? How do we talk to our neighbors, our friends who are Jewish, our Christian friends, our Muslim friends, and our friends who are probably just not so informed, but are just seeing very polarized headlines right now, or tweets right now, very polarized tweets? What's your advice on how to talk to them about what's going on in Israel, who the people of Israel really are, and how to not just understand Israel through this polarizing time and 140 character takes?
I think that the most important thing to understand is that knowing anything about Israel, having been to Israel, you don't need any special kind of messaging, because what you are equipped with is enough. I would start by asking anyone that you're having a conversation with, what would they expect their government to do when rockets are being fired at them from a terror organization? What would they demand their government to do? I would also explain what Hamas is about. Hamas is not only a recognized terror organization, recognized as such not just by Israel, not just by the United States, and many in the international community. Their charter, their agenda is open and public for anyone to see. Their statements are public. What they are about is public. And it has to do, by the way, not just with Israel and the Jewish people. There are many here in the United States who, in the name of liberal and progressive values, feel that they need to relate to the Palestinians. And I say, by all means, we want a better future for the Palestinians as well. Hamas is not what will get them on the road to that better future. Hamas is not just a terror organization inflicting and attacking Israel, their own people in the Gaza Strip. They are not free from the terror of Hamas. If you are a member of the LGBTQ community, many of them seek refuge outside of the Gaza Strip for fear of being lynched. If you are of opposing political opinions, Hamas literally threw political opponents off of rooftops when they came to power in 2007. If you're a woman in Gaza Strip today, you need permission from a male relative in order to go where you choose. The list goes on, but the oppression is an oppression that their own people suffer from. There is a very, very difficult humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. And one has to ask, why is it that millions upon millions of dollars are going into this terror infrastructure, into these rockets, into the terror tunnels? Why is that money not going towards the population, towards the health that they need, towards addressing COVID-19, towards education, towards infrastructure, water, electricity? Anyone who holds the Palestinian people dear, I think should care about that. And I would also take a step back and mention that just 2 days ago, May 14th, is when 73 years ago, the state of Israel declared its independence. That declaration met moments later by recognition from the United States, and many other countries followed suit. It was met also with several armies, Arab armies, attacking Israel the very next day. All of our neighbors refusing to recognize the legitimacy of a Jewish nation in the state of Israel. Today, 73 years later, as we all know, many have come to not only accept our right to exist, but to embrace it, to recognize that relations with the state of Israel are a mutual interest for the better of all our peoples, for the better future for all our children. And we have seen that in the past year with the signing of the historic Abraham Accords and further peace agreements with 4 countries. In our Declaration of Independence, Israel has stated that our hand is extended in peace to all our neighbors. That has remained true all these years. Whenever there was a partner that was willing to make peace, peace became a reality. We've seen it with Egypt, we've seen it with Jordan, and as I said this past year, with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Sudan, with Morocco. That is yet a decision to be made by Palestinian leadership. And I think that anyone with Palestinian best interest at heart should encourage them to take that path of negotiations towards a peace agreement with Israel rather than a path of terror attacks, aiming at eliminating the state of Israel. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Israel's Proclamation of Independence. I think it's one of the most inspiring documents that anybody that cares about Israel can read, to see what's in there and the call for brotherhood, with all the neighbors, and the dedication Israel took in its founding moment for full rights for everybody that's a citizen. I have a question about elections. Recently, Israel has gone through.
We have a lot of experience in those.
Right. So on one side, we have Israel having had 5 elections in a short period. On the other side, we have the Palestinian Authority hasn't had an election in, I think, over a decade. Can you speak both to the Hamas and Fatah rivalry and how that is impacting Israel's partner with the Palestinians, and also Israel's struggle to form a lasting government? It's 2 very different situations, so I'm not conflating the 2, but just how are those 2 situations making it harder for the 2 sides to deal with one another and work on negotiations like you just laid out the ideal?
Mm-hmm. Well, indeed, 2 very different situations. With regards to the Palestinians, it is an internal matter for the Palestinians to determine their leadership, to hold their elections. But it is important to say that strengthening the Hamas and encouragement that is coming from different voices in the international community are doing a disservice to the Palestinian people and are doing a disservice to the Palestinian Authority. Because in the end, a terror organization is not going to get them in any positive direction. With regards to Israel, a very different situation. We have a very robust, vibrant democracy, which we take great pride in. But for the past 4 now rounds of elections, it has been very challenging for any member of Knesset to successfully form a wide coalition, a government. We are now following the 4th round of elections. We are now still in the phase of one of the Knesset members who has been given the task of trying to form a coalition, Yair Lapid. He has not yet returned that mandate to the president. If he is unsuccessful, we will likely be heading to a 5th round of elections. It is not far from ideal for any country, certainly Israel. I think that no one is excited about the prospect of another round of elections, but it is a part of our democracy. With all advantages and disadvantages, that is what makes our democracy so strong. And if need be, it will be a 5th round of elections until a new government is formed. But I will say this, there have been many voices also during the last few days addressing the current government and the current prime minister in this situation, in how we are responding to the situation. And I have to say that on matters of security, at a time when we are being attacked, there is very little difference. There is very little daylight on the Israeli political spectrum. We are all in agreement that we must defend ourselves. And that is relevant, whether it's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in this current government or any other Israeli government. Hamas, by the way, has not just reserved its attacks towards Israel when Prime Minister Netanyahu has been in government for this current government. So again, these attempts to tie what has no relation to the reality on the ground, I think it's important to address that.
Thank you. Can you speak to Israel's strategy in response in Gaza? What are its priorities with the current operation, and what is Israel doing to help prevent loss of life? And within that, could you also comment, there was a lot of news stories over the weekend about the targeting of a building that was being reported as a media tower of the AP and Al Jazeera. Can you just walk us through, are those stories true? And if so, why was that building targeted, as part of your comments?
Mm-hmm. Over this past week, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, have conducted about 1,500 targeted strikes in the Gaza Strip. All of them aimed at terrorists, terror infrastructure, terror intelligence, terror tunnels, and everything that is a part of the terror mechanism. in the Gaza Strip. We have gone and are going to great lengths in order to minimize any potential civilian casualty. We are doing so not just with the intelligence at hand, but we are actually making contact on the ground. We are calling and we are texting civilians in the vicinity of where we are planning to strike in order to ask them to evacuate, in order to avoid any harm. And that is why you mentioned the building that was occupied by AP and Al Jazeera. It was occupied not just by them, it was occupied also by Hamas operatives and Hamas intelligence. It was being used also for informing and directing attacks on Israel, which is why it was identified as a legitimate military target. But that is why when that building was targeted and taken down, not one person was injured in that attack. All had been evacuated in advance. Because, as I mentioned, Hamas is intentionally choosing to place itself, to place its infrastructure among dense civilian populations. It is very difficult. With every effort that we are making, it is very difficult to avoid any casualty at all. If Hamas were to place their infrastructure and whatever it is that they are doing within civilian populations outside of those populations, which they could do, there would be no harm to civilians. But again, they are intentionally placing them in harm's way.
Thank you so much. I got another question here on a topic that, from what you're saying, is kind of being misconstrued as a reason things might have been flared up. You said this is really a planned attack by Hamas that's been going on for some time, but there has been in the news recently issues in East Jerusalem with housing evictions, and there's a Supreme Court case. Can you just give us a little context on that current issue? What's going on, and how can you help us understand that?
Okay. So as I mentioned, the matter of Sheikh Jarrah, a neighborhood in East Jerusalem, is not a matter that the state of Israel is involved in. It is a private matter deliberated in the courts that has to do with real estate, with property. And that goes back to pre-1948 Jewish ownership of properties in that neighborhood. In 1948, when the Jordanians assumed control of East Jerusalem, Palestinian families entered and assumed tenancy of these properties without receiving any form of ownership by the authorities, then the Jordanian. In 1967, when Israel regained control of East Jerusalem, the courts were open for anyone wishing to make claims with regards to property that they had there. And that is exactly the case. And those who had deeds in their hands for those properties came before the court. There were deliberations for years. There was eventually an agreement signed in the late 70s and the early 1980s, agreeing that those who are living there would be protected. They agreed to pay a certain amount of rent. And this issue has been has surfaced again because of a refusal to pay rent. Now, this is a matter that can happen here in the United States as well, you know. If you have squatters or if you have tenants who refuse to pay rent, the court can interfere, and the court can intervene and decide this way or that way regarding those who have the deeds of ownership and those who are residing in the property. That is exactly what is at hand now. The final decision by the Supreme Court is yet to be taken. As was mentioned, it was postponed now, the hearing by 30 days because of all the tension surrounding this. And because of the awareness that, yes, while it is a property dispute, it is very complicated, made complicated by the fact that it is about Palestinian families living there and Jewish owners who are claiming their rights to this property. The complexity of that is a complexity that is true for our region in general. Jewish refugees from Arab countries arrived in the state of Israel, leaving behind property that they never received back, they never had a claim to. That is the nature, not just in the Middle East, that is the nature of populations moving when there is conflict. They are uprooted, they move from one place to another, often leaving behind property. My family, my father's family, who emigrated from Egypt following the establishment of the State of Israel, their family had moving from to Egypt from Syria earlier, had left property in Syria. We have no claim to that property. We could, but there's no one to speak with. That is a part of the reality of the Middle East. Yes, it's complicated. But the matter at hand, specifically with regards to these properties in East Jerusalem, it's not about this whole theoretical issue. It's about specific houses, specific properties, and a real estate dispute between those who are living there and the owners who have still the rightful ownership. And it is for the courts to decide how the matter is to be resolved. It is not about the state of Israel evicting anyone.
Thank you. We're coming up toward the end of our time, and I'd like to start to end here with where we began. And I received a question from one of my board members, Dr. Alan Kritz, and also the question that's been on my mind. From your perspective, watching what's happening in the Southeast, what's your advice for our community or communities here on the call? How should we respond? Is it a rally? Is it a community gathering with prayer? Is it letters to the editor? Is it how we're talking to our friends? You know, what are you seeing? Yeah, I guess I'm making it easy for you with the multiple choice. What are you seeing that's works? What is most feels the best to see also as an Israeli in America when you see the Jewish community mobilizing? What's your advice for us here?
I think it's a very good question, because as is always the case when it comes to Israel, there is one battleground on the ground in Israel, but there is a completely different battleground when it comes to public opinion, when it comes to the media, when it comes to public discourse. And that is where we need more moral clarity, and we need the voices of those who know what this is about, who know what the truth is behind so much misinformation that exists out there. Intentional disinformation. And I think that it is important at this time not only to show solidarity with Israel, and I have to tell you, Israelis are following very closely and with great appreciation any expression of solidarity that they are seeing from around the world, from Jewish communities around the world. I know that we have been sending that through because it is important for Israelis to know that they are not alone. But so too, it is important for that message to be visible here. It is important in the face of all those who are busy condemning the democracy in the Middle East, rather than the terror organization that is attacking it, that is publicly declaring its wish to see it wiped off the face of the earth. It is important to have the visibility here as well. It is important to engage. It is important when there is an atmosphere that it is less legitimate to do so. It is all the more important to be vocal. And that is what we appreciate our friends doing. And that is what we expect anyone who wants to see a better future in the Middle East. That is what we would expect of anyone to do.
Thank you so much. I've really appreciated listening to you over the last hour, and I definitely feel much more informed with what's going on, and also with a stronger frame of how to think about it as well and interpret it, what we're saying. You know, there's so much noise out there and messages all the time. I'm wondering, and we only have a couple minutes here, but what are you seeing on the ground in Israel that's not being reported? Maybe a positive that we can take in this very difficult moment.
Okay, I will address that, but I will just add to my previous answer also, if anyone is interested, at this time, the consulate is sending out a daily update email. If anyone is interested in receiving that, then by all means, let us know. You can let me know. You can do so through Mike, I'm sure. We'd be happy to add you to that mailing list if you're interested.
Can I just, in answer to that, there will be a follow-up email that can be sent to all attendees, and we can include links for that.
Okay, so I'll give you the email address to which they can ask to be added to our mailing list. Now, with regards to Israel, I want to give you an example of something that struck me. That goes to show, I think, the resilience of our people, the resilience of Israelis, because these are very, very difficult times, very difficult days. And one of the very difficult videos out there yesterday was seeing people on the beach in Tel Aviv. Sirens all of a sudden caught them while they were on the beach, and you saw a video of people deserting the beach and running to find shelter. And you had these images of these towels, you know, spread on the beach. And I think that Israelis finding the state of mind to go to the beach, to be there during these attacks, to run for shelter, and then to go back to their towel on the beach, to go back to enjoying life outside. I think that's an excellent example of that resilience. And it's that resilience that has kept us going for the past 73 years. And it's that resilience that I know is not going anywhere.
Thank you so much, Anat, for speaking with us tonight. I really appreciate your clarity, your how articulate you are. It's clear how much you care about Israel, Israeli people. I think we're really lucky to have you as our Consul General here in the Southeast, and you're invited to come to the Triangle. We'd love to have you for a sweet tea and some barbecue, and
Great pleasure.
to continue the discussion.
And thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone on this call, mainly because you're here, because you care. And I think that is the greatest asset that we have in our relations, in Israel's relations with the Jewish community. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for being here.
I just want to say thank you to you. I want you to know that the Triangle Jewish community supports Israel and wishes you and our brethren there all a safe and peaceful end of this conflict. I also want to say I was very moved when you talked about the resilience of the Israelis. I think that's a very moving story, and I want to interject as we close on a sense of resilience. I've spoken to Israelis and they talk about the sense of humor that's still maintained throughout this. Has that been your experience, and any humor in this terrible situation?
Well, I think humor is something that probably characterizes not just Israelis, but the Jewish people in general. It is a healthy coping mechanism. But the truth is that these are very, very difficult days for Israelis. And we look forward to seeing brighter days where parents don't have to run to shelter with their children.
Thank you for a very moving presentation, and Phil, great dialogue. And we wish everybody a happy Chag Sameach, and thank you.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.